You said sorry today. Maybe you said it when you walked into a room and someone was standing near the door. Maybe you said it when you asked a question in a meeting that you already felt was probably a stupid question. Maybe you said it when someone bumped into you, they bumped into you, and the word sorry left your mouth before you even had time to think. Maybe you said it when you needed something, when you had to ask for help, when you were hungry and had to mention it, when you needed to leave early or arrive late, or take up someone's time, or take up space in a conversation that you were invited to be a part of. Maybe you said it when you cried, or when you were angry, or when you had an opinion that differed from the person next to you. Maybe you said it when you succeeded at something, apologizing quietly with your eyes for outshining someone else. Maybe you haven't said the word itself. Maybe your apology is quieter than that. Maybe it lives in the way you make yourself smaller in a room full of people. The way you wait to be spoken to before you speak. The way you phrase every thought as a question rather than a statement, as if your own mind requires external validation before it can be trusted. The way you preface your needs with "I know this is a lot," or "I don't want to bother you, but," or "I'm sorry if this is a bad time." Maybe your apology is in the way you dress, the way you walk, the amount of physical space you allow yourself to occupy, the volume of your voice, the speed at which you abandon your own position the moment someone pushes back. Maybe the apology is not a word at all. Maybe it is the entire shape of your life. And here is the question that this audiobook is going to ask you and answer over the next several hours. Why? Why are you apologizing for existing, not for something you did, not for a genuine mistake, a real harm, an actual offense? Those apologies are healthy. Those apologies are necessary. Those apologies are an expression of integrity and conscience. I am not talking about those. I am talking about the apology that comes before any mistake has been made. The apology for wanting things, for needing things, for taking up space, for having thoughts and feelings and preferences and a voice. The apology for being a person. Where did that come from? When did it start? What has it cost you? And most importantly, how do you stop? Those are the questions we are going to answer today, not in the abstract, not in the comfortable, academic way that books about self-worth sometimes do, full of theory and short on reality. In the real, specific, sometimes uncomfortable way that actually creates change. Because the fact that you are here, the fact that this title spoke to you, that something in these first few sentences already feels familiar, tells me something. It tells me that some part of you already knows, some part of you already recognizes the pattern, has perhaps been watching it for years, frustrated and unable to stop it, wondering why the word sorry comes so automatically, wondering why your own existence feels like something that requires constant justification. That part of you is right, and today we are going to give it a voice. Chapter 1, The Invisible Habit. Let's start with what it actually looks like. Because one of the most disorienting things about apologizing for existing is that it is largely invisible to you and to the people around you. It has been happening for so long that it no longer registers as behavior. It is just you. It is just the way you are. You might even have a word for it. You call yourself shy, or humble, or considerate, or low maintenance. And some of those things may be true, but they are also sometimes the story we tell ourselves to make a wound feel like a personality trait. Let's name the behaviors. Let's bring them out of the shadows and into the light where they can be examined honestly. Excessive apologizing. This is the most obvious form. Saying sorry for things that are not your fault. Saying sorry for things that are not even remotely an offense. Saying sorry for existing in a space, for having a need, for taking a moment of someone's time. Preemptive shrinking. This is when you minimize yourself before anyone asks you to. You make your request smaller than it actually is. You present your opinion with more uncertainty than you feel. You laugh off your own achievement before anyone can criticize it. You are doing the work of diminishing yourself so that no one else has to. Over-explaining and over-justifying. When you need something, anything, you do not simply ask for it. You build a case. You provide evidence. You explain the context, give the reasons, pre-answer the objections, and offer alternatives before the person has even responded. You treat your own needs as something that must be approved by a committee before they can be expressed. Abandoning your position. Someone disagrees with you, maybe gently, maybe firmly, and almost immediately you begin to fold. Not because they presented new information, not because their argument was more sound, but because disagreement feels dangerous. Because the discomfort of being at odds with someone feels unbearable. And so you retreat, you backtrack, you find sudden merit in their view, and the thing you actually believed gets quietly buried. People pleasing at your own expense, saying yes when you mean no, taking on more than you can carry because you do not want to disappoint, attending the event you did not want to attend, helping with the project you had no capacity for, giving your time, your energy, your resources to people and things that you did not freely choose, because the alternative, which is simply declining, feels selfish in a way that sitting up all night exhausted and resentful does not. Emotional apologizing, apologizing for your feelings. I'm sorry for being upset. I know I shouldn't feel this way. I'm sorry for crying. I know it's not a big deal. You have learned to experience an emotion and in the same breath invalidate it, to feel something and immediately apologize for the feeling as if your inner life is an inconvenience to the world. Physical minimizing. You make yourself physically smaller. You sit on the edge of the chair instead of taking up the full seat. You walk close to the wall instead of the center of the hallway. You speak quietly enough that people have to lean in, and when they do, you apologize for not speaking up earlier. You have learned to occupy as little physical space as possible, as though your body itself is an imposition. Now, I want you to read that list again slowly, because I guarantee that something in there felt personal. Something landed, something made you think, yes, that is me, I do that, I say that, that is the exact phrase I use. Good, that recognition is not the problem. That recognition is the beginning of the solution. because you cannot change what you cannot see. And for many people who apologize for existing, the habit is so deep, so old, so automatic, that they have literally never paused long enough to see it clearly. You are seeing it now, and the question now is not whether it is happening, it clearly is. The question is where it came from. Because understanding the origin is not just intellectual curiosity. Understanding where a behavior was born is the first and most necessary step toward dismantling it. Chapter 2. Where IT was born, nobody came into the world apologizing for their existence. Watch a small child, a toddler, before the world has had a chance to reach them, and what you see is an entity of pure, unapologetic presence. They are hungry, and they say so loudly. They are tired, and they say so. They want to be held, and they reach up without hesitation. They want to play, and they play without asking permission. They take up space without apology. They have needs, and they express them without shame. They exist without justification. That was you once. That completely natural, completely unashamed, completely present version of yourself existed before any of this started. Before the apologizing, before the shrinking, before the endless need to justify your needs and minimize your existence and earn the right to be in the room. Something happened between then and now, and for most people who carry this pattern, it was not one single dramatic event. It was not one terrible moment that you can point to and say that is where it started. For most people, it was an accumulation. A slow, subtle, relentless education in smallness. Let's talk about what that education looks like, because it comes in many forms, and not all of them look like trauma from the outside. The first teacher, a conditional love. For some people, love in childhood was not unconditional. Love was something you received when you were good, when you were quiet, compliant, agreeable, easy. Love was something that was withheld, however briefly or partially, when you were difficult, when you cried too much, when you wanted something inconvenient, when you expressed big emotions or had loud needs or took up too much of someone's attention. In those environments, children learn a lesson that is never spoken aloud, but is absorbed completely. The lesson is this: your love is contingent on your smallness. You are acceptable when you are easy. You are lovable when you are low maintenance. You are safe when you do not ask for too much, feel too much, need too much. And so, the child who needed love, who needed it desperately, who needed it like oxygen, made a rational decision. They became smaller, quieter, more agreeable, less demanding. They learned to suppress the needs that caused tension and express only the needs that were welcomed. They learned to apologize for the ones that were not. The second teacher, criticism that came without context. Not all criticism is harmful. Thoughtful, well-timed, loving criticism is one of the greatest gifts a parent or teacher can give a child. It helps them grow. It helps them understand consequence. It helps them become people of integrity and skill. But criticism that is delivered harshly, frequently, without balance, without acknowledgement of what is right, that kind of criticism teaches a very different lesson. It teaches the child that they are fundamentally flawed, not that they did something wrong, that they are something wrong. There is a profound and devastating difference between those two things. When a child hears only what they did wrong, they begin to conclude that there is very little about them that is right. And that conclusion, carried forward into adulthood, becomes the constant, low-level conviction that they are not quite good enough, that their presence requires apology, that their contributions need qualification, that their existence needs to be justified before it can be asserted. The third teacher being told, your feelings were wrong. Stop crying. You have nothing to cry about. You're too sensitive. Don't be so dramatic. It's not that serious. Calm down. Stop overreacting. These phrases are so common, so widely distributed across childhoods of every culture and background, that most people do not recognize them as harmful. They were said with varying degrees of gentleness or harshness. Sometimes they were said out of genuine concern, a parent who did not want to see their child suffer, and who did not know how to help except by telling them to stop suffering. But the child who hears these messages consistently learns something deeply damaging. They learn that their emotional reality is incorrect. Not that the situation does not warrant distress, but that the distress itself is the problem, that the feeling is wrong. That feeling, the feeling makes them wrong, and so they begin to apologize for their feelings, to hide them, to experience an emotion and simultaneously experience shame for experiencing it, to say, I know I shouldn't feel this way, which is not self-awareness. It is self-abandonment. It is the internalized voice of everyone who ever told them that what they felt was too much. The fourth teacher, environments where silence was safety. Some people grew up in homes where conflict was unpredictable and frightening, where a parent's mood could shift without warning, where saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment had real consequences, where walking quietly, staying out of the way, not drawing attention to yourself, was a genuine survival strategy. In those environments, invisibility was protection, smallness was safety. The child who learned to move through the house without making noise, to read the room before speaking, to suppress their own needs when the climate was dangerous, that child was not being passive. They were being intelligent. They were adapting to their environment with the only tools available to them. The problem is that the tools we develop in childhood do not automatically update when the environment changes. The strategy that kept you safe at 9 years old is still running at 35, even when the danger is long gone, even when the people around you are not threatening, even when the environment is completely safe, and the only thing keeping you small is the habit of being small. The fifth teacher, being praised for diminishing yourself. This one is subtle and important. Some people were never explicitly criticized for taking up space. They were praised for not taking up space. They were called a good girl or a good boy for being quiet and uncomplaining. They were told how mature they were for not asking for things. They were celebrated for being easygoing, for not making a fuss, for going with the flow. The praise felt good. Of course it felt good. Praise always feels good, and children and adults repeat the behaviors that generate praise. So they got better at disappearing, better at accommodating, better at suppressing their preferences and needs, and wishes in favor of being what other people wanted them to be. And the praise kept coming, confirming the behavior, cementing it, building a personality structure around it that looked, from the outside, like a virtue, and felt, from the inside, like a slow suffocation. You were praised for your smallness, and you kept shrinking. These 5 teachers, conditional love, unbalanced criticism, emotional invalidation, dangerous environments, and praise for disappearing, are not the only ones. There are others, cultural messages about gender that tell certain people they should be smaller, quieter, less assertive. Religious frameworks that mistake self-erasure for humility. Peer environments where standing out was punished. Relationships where a partner's comfort required your diminishment. The specific details are different for everyone, but the shape of the lesson is always the same. You learned that your existence needs to be earned. You learned that space is something you must be granted, not something you simply occupy by virtue of being alive. You learned that your needs are burdens, your feelings are problems, your presence is an imposition unless it is making itself useful or making itself invisible. And you have been carrying that lesson ever since, not because you are weak, not because you are broken, but because you were a child, and children believe what they are taught. Because you were in environments where these beliefs were reinforced so consistently that they became invisible, automatic, as natural, feeling as breathing. You were not wrong to learn what you learned. You were doing the best you could with what you had. But now you know better. And knowing better is where freedom begins. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Smallness. Understanding where the apology habit came from is important. But there is another layer beneath the behavior that we need to examine, the internal structure that holds the habit in place. Because you could understand the origin perfectly, could trace every thread back to every childhood moment with complete clarity, and still not change. Because changing behavior requires understanding not just where it came from, but what is holding it up right now, today, in your current life. The architecture of smallness is made of several interlocking beliefs. They are not usually conscious beliefs. You do not walk around thinking them explicitly. They operate below the level of awareness, shaping your behavior from underneath, like the structure of a building that you can never see, but that determines everything that stands on top of it. The first structural belief, I am too much. This is one of the most common and most painful beliefs carried by people who apologize for existing. The deep, quiet conviction that you are too intense, too emotional, too needy, too sensitive, too loud, too present, too demanding, too much of everything that makes you who you are. This belief was installed, in most cases, by experiences of being responded to as if you were too much. Someone overwhelmed by your feelings, someone impatient with your needs, someone who made it clear, in words or in silence, that you were more than they could handle. And instead of concluding that this particular person had limited capacity, which was the accurate conclusion, you concluded that you had too much to offer, which is exactly backward, but it is also exactly what a child does. Children blame themselves. It is how they maintain the illusion of control in situations where they are actually powerless. And so you began managing your too muchness, turning it down, editing it out, presenting the acceptable parts of yourself and hiding the parts that felt like too much, apologizing preemptively for the volume of your own existence. The second structural belief: my needs are burdens. Having a need, any need, feels dangerous. Asking for something feels like asking too much. Even physical needs, hunger, tiredness, pain, feel like things that require apology before they can be expressed. This belief makes a kind of sense if you grew up in an environment where your needs genuinely were inconvenient, where a parent was overwhelmed, absent, unwell, or simply did not have the capacity to meet your needs without communicating that those needs were a problem, where asking for something consistently generated stress, conflict, or withdrawal. In that environment, needing things was genuinely associated with negative consequences. Your nervous system learned to treat need as danger. And now, in any environment, need produces an automatic pre-apology, the bracing that happens before you ask for anything, as if you already know the answer is going to be some form of no, or worse, some form of you're a lot. The third structural belief: my value is conditional. I am only acceptable if I am useful. I am only lovable if I am not difficult. I am only allowed to take up space if I am giving more than I am taking. I must earn my place at the table by being helpful, agreeable, entertaining, easy, productive, or self-effacing in the right proportions at the right times. This belief is perhaps the most corrosive of all, because it makes love and belonging into a performance. There is never a moment of rest in it. There is no such thing as just being. Every moment is a potential audition for your own right to exist. People with this belief structure are exhausted, profoundly, chronically, often inexplicably exhausted, because they are working at the full-time job of earning their existence in every interaction, every room, every relationship, and no one ever tells them the job is done. The performance never ends. There is always another hoop, another standard to meet, another person whose approval needs to be secured. The fourth structural belief: conflict means the end. When someone is displeased with you, when someone pushes back against something you said or did, when tension arises in a relationship, it feels catastrophic. Not uncomfortable, catastrophic, like the relationship is about to end, like you are about to be abandoned, rejected, cast out. This is why you abandon your positions so quickly. This is why you apologize even when you know you were not wrong. This is why you will do almost anything to restore harmony, even at the expense of your own truth, because somewhere in your history, conflict was associated with something very bad. The fight that preceded the leaving, the silence that followed the argument, the relationship that never recovered, the parent whose love disappeared when you were difficult. You learned that conflict was an existential threat, and so your nervous system treats it as one every time, regardless of the actual stakes. The fifth structural belief: other people's feelings are your responsibility. If someone is unhappy, it is your fault. If someone is uncomfortable, you should fix it. If someone is disappointed, you should have done something differently. The emotional weather of everyone around you is, in some fundamental way, a reflection of how well you are performing your job of managing other people's feelings. This belief is what drives so much of the over-accommodation, the people-pleasing, the inability to say no. Because saying no causes disappointment, and your nervous system registers their disappointment as your failure, as proof that you did something wrong, as evidence that you are the kind of person who makes other people feel bad. And so you say yes, you overextend, you exhaust yourself in the service of other people's comfort. You sacrifice your own needs on the altar of other people's feelings, and then you feel guilty for the resentment that quietly builds, because even the resentment feels like a failure of character. These 5 beliefs form the architecture. They are the load-bearing walls of the house of smallness. And they do not come down just because you want them to. They come down through a specific, intentional process of examination, challenge, and replacement, which is exactly what we are going to do. Chapter 4. What you are really saying. Every apology is a communication. The apologies we make for genuine offenses communicate accountability, remorse, and respect. They say, I recognize that I caused harm, I care about that, and I take responsibility for it. Those apologies are good. They are necessary. They are among the healthiest things a person can do. But the apologies we make for existing are the constant, automatic, reflexive apologies for taking up space, for having needs, for being present in the world. Those communicate something entirely different. Let's decode them. Because when you understand what you are actually saying when you make these apologies, it becomes much harder to keep making them unconsciously. When you say sorry for bumping into something that bumped into you, you are saying, I am not entitled to the space I occupy. My presence in any given location is a concession that the environment is graciously making, and when there is any friction, regardless of whose fault it is, the appropriate response is for me to take responsibility. When you say, I don't want to bother you, but before asking a perfectly reasonable question, you are saying, I expect my needs to be an imposition. I expect that my request for help, information, or attention is more burden than it is normal human interaction. I am apologizing for the inconvenience of having the audacity to need something. When you apologize for crying, you are saying, my emotional reality is not welcome here. My feelings are an inconvenience. The fact that I am having a human response to a difficult situation is something I should be ashamed of and sorry for. When you abandon your position the moment someone disagrees, you are saying, my perspective is not worth defending. I do not trust my own mind enough to hold it under pressure. Your discomfort with my opinion is more valid than the opinion itself. You do not have to be right, you just have to push back, and I will immediately conclude that I must be wrong. When you take up less physical space, speak more quietly, sit on the edge, walk along the wall, you are saying, I am aware that my body existing in this space is a potential inconvenience, and I am actively working to minimize that inconvenience, because your comfort with my presence is more important than my right to be present. When you say yes to things you cannot and do not want to do, you are saying your need for my agreement matters more than my capacity, my preferences, or my own well-being. I will absorb the cost of your inconvenience so that you do not have to experience the minor discomfort of hearing me say no. Now sit with that, because when these apologies are decoded, when you hear what you are actually communicating with them, they are not humble, they are not modest, they are not considerate, they are an act of self-erasure. They are a daily, persistent, cumulative message to yourself and to the world that says you do not fully belong here, that your existence is provisional, that your presence is a gift others are giving you rather than a right you were born with. And here is the part that is genuinely difficult to hear. Every time you make one of these apologies, you believe it more. The relationship between behavior and belief runs in both directions. We believe what we believe and then act accordingly, yes. But we also come to believe what we consistently act as if we believe. Every time you apologize for taking up space, you reinforce the belief that your staking requires apology. Every time you apologize for your needs, you deepen the conviction that your needs are burdens. Every time you abandon your position at the first sign of pushback, you confirm the belief that your perspective was not worth holding. You are not just expressing a belief when you make these apologies. You are teaching that belief to yourself over and over, hundreds of times a day, which means that changing this pattern is not just about changing a behavior. It is about changing a relationship. The relationship you have with yourself, the story you carry about your own worth, the internal framework that says your existence is something you must earn rather than something you simply, inherently, irrevocably are. Chapter 5. The cost nobody counts. There is a cost to this pattern, a real cost, a cost that can be measured in very concrete ways, even if it rarely is. Most people who apologize for existing have never actually added up the bill. They have felt the weight of it, the exhaustion, the resentment, the quiet sadness of feeling perpetually invisible, even in rooms full of people who know them. But they have not looked at it directly. They have not named the specific things this pattern has cost them. We are going to do that now, because the truth is that most people do not change patterns that feel merely uncomfortable. They change patterns when they clearly see what the pattern is costing them, the cost in relationships. When you consistently make yourself smaller in relationships, when you accommodate, agree, suppress, and apologize, you attract and maintain a very specific dynamic. You attract people who are comfortable being accommodated, people who receive your constant yielding as normal, who come to expect your agreement, who stop asking what you want because you never seem to want much, who stop checking on how you're doing because you always say fine, who, in some cases, grow comfortable with a relationship in which your needs are not really on the table because you took them off the table long ago. And you stay in relationships that do not fully see you because making yourself fully visible feels too dangerous. The person in your life right now who does not know your real opinion on the things that matter to you that is a casualty of this pattern. The friendship you maintained long after it stopped feeding you, because you could not bring yourself to let it change, that is a casualty. The relationship where you were always the one who gave and rarely the one who received, and where the exhaustion eventually turned into resentment that corroded the whole thing, that is a casualty. The connection that could have been deep and mutual and real, but stayed surface level because you were never quite fully there, because the fully, their version of you felt too risky to bring. That is a casualty. The cost in work and career, the brilliant idea you did not share because you decided it wasn't good enough. The promotion you did not ask for because you did not feel you had the right. The boundary you did not set with a colleague who was taking advantage of your agreeableness. The credit you did not take for the thing you built because you are uncomfortable claiming ownership of your own contributions. The meeting you sat through and said nothing in, watching the discussion go in exactly the wrong direction, knowing you had the information to redirect it, and saying nothing because it was not your place, it was not your moment, you were not sure enough, you did not want to make people uncomfortable, you did not want to be wrong in front of everyone. The cost in daily energy, managing this pattern is exhausting. It sounds paradoxical. The person who makes themselves small is working very hard, because the work of smallness is constant, monitoring the emotional temperature of every room before you speak, calculating whether your need is small enough to justify expressing, editing every statement to remove the parts that might be too much, watching other people's faces for signs of displeasure so you can adjust accordingly, pre-apologizing, post-apologizing, apologizing for the apology. All of that is labor. Invisible, constant, draining labor that leaves you at the end of every day exhausted in a way that is hard to explain, because you did not do anything obviously taxing. You just went through your day, careful to not take up too much space. The cost in self-knowledge. When you spend enough years suppressing your preferences, opinions, needs, and feelings, you begin to lose track of what they actually are. People deep in this pattern often struggle to answer simple questions. What do you want? What do you like? What matters to you? What do you actually think about this? The answers are genuinely unclear. Not because there are no answers, but because the habit of suppression has become so automatic that the process of having a preference and immediately editing it happens faster than consciousness can catch it. You have been so busy being what others needed you to be that you have become a stranger to yourself. The cost in self-respect, and at the foundation of all the other costs, is this one. Every time you make yourself smaller than you are, every time you apologize for needing something reasonable, every time you abandon a true belief under pressure, every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you shrink, a part of you watches, a part of you keeps a record. Not consciously, not in a list, but somewhere in the body, somewhere in the felt sense of yourself, there is an ongoing account of how you treat yourself, of whether you stand up for yourself or abandon yourself, of whether you trust your own mind or immediately defer to the nearest other, of whether you believe your needs matter or consistently demonstrate that they do not. And the balance in that account, the quality of your relationship with yourself, is the foundation of your entire life. You cannot love other people fully from a place of self-abandonment. You cannot do your best work from a place of persistent self-doubt. You cannot build a life that reflects who you are when you do not allow yourself to be who you are. This is the deepest cost, and it is the one worth examining most honestly. Chapter 6. The 7 Phases of Apologizing for Existing. The apology habit does not look the same in every person. It wears different faces. It expresses itself differently depending on personality, background, gender, culture, and the specific lessons that were learned in specific environments. Let's walk through 7 of the most common phases, because recognizing yourself in one of them, or in several, is part of the process of making the invisible visible. The peacekeeper. The peacekeeper's primary mission in life is the absence of conflict. They are the ones who smooth things over, who change the subject when tensions rise, who make everyone comfortable, who find the middle ground before anyone has asked for it. From the outside, this looks like social grace, and sometimes it is. But underneath the peacekeeping is often a deep fear of conflict itself, not just discomfort with conflict, but a genuine, visceral conviction that conflict means danger. The peacekeeper apologizes not with words, but with behavior. They absorb tension. They redirect anger. They shrink their own position to zero, so that there is nothing left to argue about. And in doing so, they spend their entire lives managing other people's emotional weather while their own goes completely unnoticed and unmanaged. The over-explainer. Ask the over-explainer a simple question, and you will get a comprehensive answer that covers every possible objection before any has been raised. Ask them for a favor, and they will give you 17 reasons why they need it, most of which are designed to justify the need itself. The over-explainer is not trying to be thorough. They are trying to be safe. If I explain enough, you cannot reject me. If I cover every angle, you cannot find fault. If I make my need so justified that no reasonable person could refuse it, then maybe it will be acceptable for me to have needed it in the first place. The irony is that over-explanation often produces the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of communicating confidence and clarity, it communicates anxiety. Instead of making the request feel more acceptable, it makes the person asking seem less secure in their right to ask. The self-deprecator, before anyone can criticize them, they criticize themselves. Before anyone can be unimpressed, they undermine their own work with qualifications and disclaimers. Oh, this isn't very good, but I'm not sure this makes sense. But this is probably a stupid question. But the self-deprecator has learned that preemptive criticism is safer than unexpected criticism. If you get there first, the blow is softer. If you already said it wasn't good, then when someone agrees, it doesn't hurt as much. But the behavior carries a cost that exceeds its protective value. It teaches the audience that the work is not worth taking seriously. It teaches the speaker that their contributions require apology before they can be made. and it ensures that the best version of what they have to offer is always presented behind a curtain of qualification. The invisible one, they are in the room but barely registered. They sit where they will not be noticed. They speak when spoken to, and when they do speak, it is quietly, briefly, with their eyes on the floor. They are the person you realize you have known for years, but still know almost nothing about, not because they are boring, but because they have never allowed you to get close enough to learn who they really are. The invisible one learned that visibility was dangerous, that standing out invited scrutiny, that being seen too clearly meant being judged too directly, and so invisibility became the armor. It protected them, and it isolated them. These are almost never separable. The chronic yes-sayer, they cannot say no, not because they do not want to. They want to deeply, but no feels dangerous in a way that yes does not. Yes is agreeable. Yes is easy. Yes does not create the moment of tension, the possibility of disappointment, the look on someone's face that says you are letting me down. So they say yes to the extra shift, the additional project, the favor they do not have the time or energy for, the invitation they dread, the commitment they will resent before it arrives. And they sit with the quietly building backlog of things they agreed to and did not want, burning the candle of their own well-being to keep everyone else comfortably lit. The emotional manager, they are exquisitely tuned to the feelings of everyone around them. They can read a room the moment they enter it. They know when someone is off, when tension is building, when the dynamic has shifted, and they immediately go to work addressing it. Not because they are empathetic, though they may be, but because other people's emotional discomfort feels like their problem to fix. The emotional discomfort of others is a personal alarm system. It says someone is unhappy, and therefore something is wrong, and therefore you need to do something about it right now. They exhaust themselves managing other people's emotional weather, and in the middle of all that management, their own emotional weather goes perpetually unaddressed. The grateful for everything, not grateful in the healthy, abundant sense, grateful in the anxious sense, grateful in the I cannot believe you would put up with me sense, grateful in the way that communicates that they were not expecting to be treated well, that kindness comes as a surprise, that care is remarkable, that simple decency is something they feel they must acknowledge and appreciate in an outsized way, because some part of them believes they are lucky to receive it at all. They say things like, I don't deserve you, or I can't believe you're being so nice, or you really didn't have to do that. And underneath, the gratitude is something that aches the belief that they were not supposed to receive good treatment, that they are somehow not the kind of person who simply, naturally, deserved it. Do you recognize yourself, maybe in one of these, maybe in several, maybe in all of them, at different times with different people? Good, because recognition is not shame. Recognition is power. You cannot dismantle what you cannot see. Chapter 7. The permission trap here is one of the most important things in this entire audiobook. Most people who apologize for existing are waiting for something. They are waiting for permission. Permission to take up space. Permission to have needs. Permission to speak. Permission to disagree. permission to be wrong sometimes without it defining them, permission to be difficult occasionally without it ending the relationship, permission to simply exist without justifying that existence to anyone. And the terrible, liberating, disorienting truth is this: the permission was never coming from outside. It was never going to arrive in the form of someone finally saying, yes, you are enough, yes, you belong here, yes, your needs are valid, yes, your voice matters. Not because those affirmations are not meaningful when they come, they are, but because external permission, by its very nature, has the same problem as external validation: it can be revoked. It depends on someone else's mood, their generosity, their capacity on any given day. It has to be continuously re-earned. It is not a foundation, it is weather. The permission trap is the belief that you need someone else's approval before you are allowed to occupy your own life. And the people who fall into this trap, which is almost everyone who carries this pattern, spend enormous amounts of energy trying to engineer the conditions under which permission might be granted. They try to be perfect enough that no one could reasonably object to their existence. They try to be useful enough that their presence is always justified by the value they provide. They try to be agreeable enough that no one has a reason to withdraw their approval. They try to be small enough that they never become a burden. None of it works, because the problem is not that they have not yet done enough to earn permission. The problem is that the entire framework, the belief that permission is something you earn from other people, is false. You do not need permission to exist. You did not need it when you were born. The universe did not issue a questionnaire before your arrival, assessing whether your presence was warranted. You arrived, you were here, you were a person, complete and whole and deserving of the same consideration as every other person on the planet. That has not changed. The need, the wants, the feelings, the opinions, the space, they are not things you must earn the right to have. They are simply features of being alive. They are what a person is. The liberation from the permission trap does not come from finding the right person who finally gives you the approval you need. It comes from recognizing slowly, imperfectly, again and again, that you were waiting for a bus that was never going to arrive, and then deciding to walk. Let me be specific about what this looks like in practice. It looks like asking for what you need without a preamble of apology. Not because the need is small, but because needs do not require justification. They simply are. It looks like expressing an opinion and holding it under pressure, not because you are rigid or closed, but because your mind deserves at least as much respect as anyone else's. You can be wrong and update your view when you encounter better information, but you do not update your view simply because someone expressed displeasure with it. It looks like saying no cleanly without extensive explanation when no is the honest answer. You are allowed to have limits. You are allowed to have capacity constraints. You are allowed to not want to do things. These are not character failures. It looks like occupying physical space without apology, sitting fully in the chair, walking down the center of the hallway, speaking at a volume that assumes you have a right to be heard. it looks like feeling your feelings without immediately invalidating them. Not performing emotions, but also not editing them out. You are allowed to be affected by things. You are allowed to respond to your own life. None of this is arrogance. None of this is selfishness. None of this is putting your needs above everyone else's. It is simply treating yourself as a full person, as someone who counts, as someone whose presence in the world is not an imposition, but a fact, and a fact worth honoring. Chapter 8. The people who taught you to shrink. We touched on this in the chapter on origins. But I want to go deeper, because many people who carry this pattern have a complicated relationship with the people who taught it to them. Because in many cases, those people were not monsters. They were parents who were doing the best they could with their own unhealed wounds. They were teachers who were overwhelmed and undertrained. They were peers who were themselves in pain. They were partners who were carrying their own insecurities and who, consciously or not, needed you smaller so that they could feel larger. Most of the people who taught you to shrink did not intend to harm you. That is true, and it does not make the harm less real. These two things need to exist at the same time. You can understand that your parents' criticism came from their own anxiety and still acknowledge that it left marks. You can recognize that your first partner's need for your diminishment came from their own insecurity and still name the cost it had on you. You can see the human complexity in the people who shaped you and still decide that what they taught you is not something you have to keep. Understanding the people who shaped this pattern is not the same as excusing the pattern. It is not forgiveness in the sense of pretending it did not happen. It is seeing clearly, which is the prerequisite for change. There is also something that needs to be said about the ongoing relationships in your life. Not the historical ones, the current ones, because some of you are not just carrying a pattern from the past. You are in relationships right now, friendships, romantic partnerships, work environments, family dynamics, where your smallness is not just an old habit. It is being actively maintained. There are people in your life right now who are comfortable with your current size, who benefit from your agreeableness, who rely on your inability to say no, who have never had to genuinely consider your needs because you have never made them consider your needs. When you begin to change this pattern, when you begin to take up your actual space, express your actual needs, hold your actual positions, some of those people will not be comfortable. Some of them will push back. They will say you have changed, and not as a compliment. They will call you difficult. They will say you are being selfish or too sensitive or unnecessarily confrontational. What they are actually saying is that they preferred the version of you who was easier to take advantage of. And that is important information, not necessarily about whether the relationship is worth keeping. People can adjust to new versions of people they love. People who genuinely care about you will, after the initial friction, be glad that you are taking up your full space. They may even be relieved. Many people who have been in a relationship with someone who constantly self-erases carry their own guilt about it. They sensed the sacrifice. They wondered if they were taking too much, and they did not know how to address it. But the people who cannot adjust, who require your smallness as a condition of the relationship. That is information you needed. It does not make them bad people. It makes them people whose relationship with you was built on a dynamic that did not serve you. You deserve relationships that can hold your full size. That is not a luxury. That is the baseline. Chapter 9. Guilt, shame, and the difference between them. To understand why this pattern is so hard to break, you need to understand two emotions that are deeply involved in maintaining it. Guilt and shame, they sound similar. They are often grouped together. But they are fundamentally different in nature, in origin, and in what they do to us. And the difference matters enormously when it comes to this pattern. Guilt is about behavior. Guilt says, I did something wrong. It is specific. It is attached to an action. I said something unkind. I let someone down. I did not follow through on a commitment. The object of guilt is external. It points to something I did, not something I am. Guilt, in healthy doses, is functional. It signals when our actions have moved outside our values. It motivates repair, an apology, a correction, a change in behavior. When someone feels appropriate guilt, makes amends, and adjusts their behavior, the guilt dissolves. It has done its job. Guilt is about what you did. Shame is about who you are. Shame says, I am something wrong. It is global. It is attached to identity. Not I did a bad thing, but I am bad. Not I made a mistake, but I am a mistake. The object of shame is internal. It points not at an action, but at the self. And unlike guilt, shame does not motivate repair. It motivates hiding, because if the problem is not what you did, but who you are, there is no action that can fix it. You cannot repair your fundamental nature. You can only conceal it. This is why shame drives the apologizing for existing patterns so directly. The person who feels chronic shame is not apologizing for specific things they did. They are apologizing for what they are, for being too much, or not enough, or wrong in some way that they cannot quite name, but that they feel continuously. The apology is not aimed at a particular offense. It is aimed at the self, and no apology can ever be enough, because what is being apologized for cannot be changed. The self is still there. The shameful thing, the fundamental inadequacy, the basic too-muchness, the essential wrongness persists through every apology. And so the apology must be made again, and again, and again. This is the loop that shame creates. And here is something critically important to understand about shame. Shame thrives in secrecy and isolation. It grows in the dark, behind silence, inside the conviction that if people really knew you, if they saw the full, unedited version, they would leave. Shame dissolves in witness, in being seen and not rejected, in saying the true, complicated, imperfect thing, and discovering that the person across from you did not disappear. This is why vulnerability, genuine, not performative vulnerability, is one of the most powerful antidotes to shame. Not because it always produces the ideal response from the other person, but because the act of stepping out from behind the concealment and still surviving, still being met, still being present, teaches the nervous system that being known is survivable. that you do not have to hide to be safe, that your full self is not the catastrophe you have been protecting everyone from. Guilt can be resolved through action. Shame can only be healed through connection, and the connection must begin with yourself. You have to stop treating your own shame with more shame. Stop apologizing for the apology. Stop feeling bad about feeling bad. The shame spiral is not deeper insight, it is deeper imprisonment. You have to begin slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of backsliding, treating yourself with the same basic consideration you would extend to any other person. Not because you have earned it, not because you have finally become enough, but because you are a person. And persons deserve it. Chapter 10, Reclaiming Your Voice. Your voice was the first thing you lost. Not your physical voice, though some people have quieted even that. Your voice in the larger sense. The voice that says what you think, what you need, what you feel, what you believe, what you will and will not accept. The voice that says I am here. Reclaiming it is not a single event. It is not a decision you make once and then it is done. It is a practice, a daily practice of choosing, in each moment where the apology impulse arises, to do something different. Let's talk about what that practice actually looks like. The first practice, notice before you change. Before you can change a habit, you have to catch it in the act. Most people who apologize for existing do it so automatically that the behavior completes itself before awareness arrives. The sorry is out of their mouth before they knew they were about to say it. The first practice is simply noticing. Start watching, start listening to yourself. When does the apology impulse arise? What triggers it? Who is in the room? What is the situation? What is the feeling in your body a split second before the apology comes? You are not trying to stop anything yet. You are just watching, building awareness, bringing the invisible pattern into the light where it can be seen. You may be surprised by how often it happens once you start actually counting. The second practice, pause before you respond. When you feel the impulse to apologize, to shrink, to abandon a position, to over-explain a need, pause. Not a long pause, a breath, a single moment of space between the impulse and the action. In that pause, ask one question. Is this apology for something I actually did wrong? If yes, make the apology. It deserves to be made. If no, if the apology is for existing, for needing something, for having a feeling, for occupying space, don't make it. Not yet as a firm no. Just hold the pause. Stay in the discomfort of not immediately smoothing things over. Let yourself feel what it feels like to not automatically shrink. The pause is where freedom lives. In the space between impulse and action, you have choice, and choice is the beginning of change. The third practice, replace the apology with a statement. When you catch yourself about to apologize for a need, replace it with a direct statement. Instead of, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if maybe say, I have a question. Instead of I know this probably sounds stupid, but say, I have an idea. Instead of I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take up your time, say nothing. Or say, thank you for your time. The replacement does not have to be aggressive or assertive in a performed way. It simply has to be unqualified, a statement that does not begin by apologizing for itself. This will feel deeply uncomfortable at first. The urge to soften, to hedge, to apologize is strong, and going against it will produce anxiety. That anxiety is normal. It is the nervous system signaling that you are doing something new. It is not a signal that you are doing something wrong. Sit with the discomfort. It will diminish, not immediately, but it will diminish. The fourth practice: hold your position for one more beat. When someone disagrees with you and you feel the immediate urge to fold, hold your position for one more beat. Not forever, not stubbornly, not with your eyes closed to better information, just for one more moment before you decide. Ask yourself, did they present a new argument? Did they offer information I did not have? Or did they simply push back, simply express displeasure, simply repeat their own view more firmly? If it is the latter, you are allowed to maintain your position. You can say, I hear you, I see it differently, and then hold it. Disagreement is not emergency. Someone being displeased with your perspective is not a catastrophe. They can disagree with you, and you can both survive it. You can disagree and still be in relationship. You can hold a position and still be a kind, caring, decent person. The strength of an argument is not measured by how firmly it is stated. Update your views for better information, but not for social pressure. The fifth practice: let the silence stand. When you have said what needed to be said, when you have made the request, expressed the feeling, stated the need, let the silence stand. Do not fill it with qualifications. Do not rush in to soften what you just said. Do not apologize for having said it. Silence after a genuine statement is not a signal that you said something wrong. It is simply the space the other person needs to respond. Trust that the moment does not need your management. Trust that what you said was said well enough. Trust that you do not need to immediately retreat from it. Let it land. Let them respond. Give the communication space to breathe. The sixth practice: speak at your full volume, not louder than feels natural, but not quieter than you actually are. If you have a habit of speaking softly, quietly enough that people have to lean in, quietly enough that you can always claim they did not hear you if they do not respond the way you hoped, try speaking at the volume that assumes you have a right to be heard, because you do. Your voice has the right to occupy the same acoustic space as anyone else in the room. You are not obligated to shrink your physical presence or your auditory presence to avoid taking up space. You are there. You are present. Your voice is welcome. Speak like you believe that. Chapter 11. The identity you lost and the one you are building somewhere underneath all of this, underneath the apologies and the shrinking and the endless accommodations and the quiet self-erasure, there is a self that was never fully allowed to emerge, a version of you that has opinions and does not immediately qualify them, that has needs and does not feel guilty for having them, that occupies space without monitoring how much space it is taking up, that can hear no from someone else without interpreting it as evidence of its own unworthiness. That self was not destroyed. It was not eliminated by the education in smallness. it is still there, quieter than it should be, waiting with a patience that is either very trusting or very tired. And the work of this audiobook, the work of everything we have been talking about, is not really about stopping a behavior. Stopping the apologies, stopping the shrinking, stopping the yes when you mean no. The behavior is the surface. The real work is the identity underneath. The question is not how do I stop apologizing. The question is who am I when I am not apologizing? Who are you when you are not managing everyone's comfort? Who are you when you are not performing smallness to make someone else feel large? Who are you when you are not waiting for permission to simply be? This question feels disorienting for many people, because the identity of self-erasure, for all its costs, has also been a kind of container, a known way of being in the world, a reliable, if painful, strategy for navigating relationships and environments. When you begin to dismantle it, there is a period of not knowing, a period where the old identity is loosening and the new one is not yet solid, a period of feeling exposed, a little groundless, unsure of who you are when you are not making yourself small. That period is uncomfortable, and it is also where the real growth happens, because in that open space, in the not yet known, you get to make choices you have never made before, about what you actually think, what you actually want, what kind of relationships you want to be in, what kind of work you want to do, what kind of life you actually want to live. You get to meet yourself, perhaps for the first time as an adult, without the filter of other people's comfort, without the frame of who you were trained to be. Just you, with all the complexity, and the needs, and the opinions, and the feelings, and the ideas that you have been managing and suppressing and apologizing for all these years. The identity you are building is not a performance of confidence. You do not need to become loud, assertive, bold in the way that gets rewarded in certain cultural scripts. You do not need to perform self-assurance. You need to build the quiet, unshakable, private conviction that you are enough, that your presence does not require justification, that your needs are not burdens, that your voice is welcome, that your feelings are valid information, not inconveniences to manage. This conviction is built the same way all convictions are built, through repeated experience that confirms it, through taking up space and nothing terrible happening, through expressing a need and having it met, through holding a position and finding that the relationship survived the disagreement, through saying no and discovering that the person across from you did not disappear. None of this is guaranteed to be smooth or to feel safe. Some of the new behaviors will produce discomfort in you and in the people around you who are adjusting to a new version of you. But the building of this new identity is not optional, not if you want a life that actually belongs to you, not if you want relationships that see and honor the real you, not if you want to stop waking up exhausted from the labor of being smaller than you are. The identity you lost is waiting, and the one you are building will be better because it will be chosen. Chapter 12. Practical steps starting today. Everything we have covered until now is foundational. You need to understand the pattern, its origins, its costs, its architecture. Without that understanding, any practical steps become techniques floating in a vacuum, disconnected from the real reasons they are needed. But understanding without action is just comfortable insight, and comfortable insight does not change a life. So let's talk about what you actually do today, not someday, not when you feel more ready. Today, step 1, audit your apologies for 24 hours. Starting today, count your apologies. Every sorry, every I don't mean to bother you, every pre-apology, every abandonment of a position under social pressure. Keep an informal count. Do not judge it. Do not shame yourself. Just count. This audit, it will do two things. It will make the invisible visible. Most people are genuinely shocked by how frequently this pattern operates. And it will begin to create a tiny but real gap between the impulse and the action. The act of watching yourself shifts the relationship from automatic to observed. Observed behavior can be changed. Automatic behavior cannot. Step 2. Identify your highest risk situations. Based on the audit, you will begin to notice patterns, certain people, certain environments, certain types of interactions that consistently trigger the apology impulse. Maybe it is your manager. Maybe it is a particular family member. Maybe it is any situation where you perceive that someone is displeased. Maybe it is any time you need to ask for something. Maybe it is being in a group where everyone else seems more confident. Know your triggers. Name them specifically, because the situations where you are most vulnerable to the pattern are also the situations where your practice will matter most. Step 3. Prepare one new response for your most common apology. You do not need to overhaul everything at once. Pick the apology you make most often, the one that feels most automatic, the one that you already know is not serving you, and prepare a replacement. If you habitually pre-apologize before asking questions, "I'm sorry, this might be a stupid question," replace it with "I have a question." Say it out loud. Practice it, the sound of it without apology. Practice until the replacement feels more natural than the habit. One apology, one replacement. That is the entire step for this week. Step 4. Practice one no. Find one situation this week where no is the honest answer, and you would normally say yes. It does not need to be a big no. It does not need to be dramatic or confrontational. It can be quiet. It can be gentle, but it needs to be honest. "I can't make it this time. That doesn't work for me. I don't have the capacity for that right now." Notice what happens. Notice the discomfort in your body before you say it. Notice what happens to that discomfort after you say it. Notice what the other person actually does, as opposed to what you feared they would do. Most of the time, the response is simply "okay," or "let me know if that changes," or "no problem," not the catastrophe you braced for. Step 5. Express one need without justification. Think of something you need, something you would normally wrap in extensive explanation and apology before expressing. And express it without the wrapping. Not a huge need. Start small. "I'm hungry," instead of "I know we're all busy, and I hate to be the one to bring it up, but maybe at some point," when it's convenient, we could possibly think about eating. I need to leave by 6, instead of I'm so sorry. I know this might mess up the plans. I completely understand if that's a problem. I just have this thing, and I feel terrible about it. A need, stated simply, watch what happens. The world, very likely, will continue to exist. Step 6. Spend 10 minutes daily with your own thoughts. Not in productivity mode, not with a task or a goal. 10 minutes of simply being with yourself. What do you think about the thing that happened today? What did you actually feel during that meeting, underneath the performance of being fine? What do you want? Not what you think you should want, not what would be easiest to want. What do you actually want? The process of reconnecting with your own inner life, of listening to yourself rather than managing yourself, is one of the most important parts of reclaiming the identity that was lost. You cannot honor a self you are not in contact with. Step 7. Find one person to practice with. Pick someone in your life who you trust, not necessarily deeply. You do not need to share your entire psychological history. Just someone with whom you can practice being a slightly fuller version of yourself. Express an honest opinion. Share a genuine feeling. Ask for something without pre-apology. Disagree gently once. Watch what happens. Let the experience tell you something real about what is actually possible when you stop performing smallness. Chapter 13. The new language of self-respect. Language shapes reality. The words you use, both to others and in the privacy of your own mind, are not just descriptions of your experience. They are participants in creating your experience. The constant language of apology and self-diminishment is not just reporting the belief that you do not belong. It is reinforcing that belief. It is teaching it to your brain again and again, every time you use it. Changing the language does not change everything, but it is a genuine and important part of the change. Let's look at specific substitutions, not as rules to follow perfectly, but as directions to move in. Instead of "I'm sorry for bothering you," try "Thank you for your time." The shift here is meaningful. The first version positions your interaction as an imposition that requires apology. The second version acknowledges the other person's time as valuable without framing your request as a burden. Instead of "I don't know if this makes sense," try "Here is what I think." You are allowed to think things. Those thoughts are allowed to be expressed without a disclaimer that apologizes for their potential inadequacy. Instead of "Does that make sense?" after explaining something, try "Does that answer your question?" or "What are your thoughts on that?" The first version implicitly positions the potential for confusion as your failure. The alternative versions are collaborative without being self-undermining. Instead of "I'm probably wrong," but try "I see it differently." "I'm probably wrong" preemptively seeds the argument before it begins. "I see it differently" holds your perspective while acknowledging that there is another view. It is assertive without being aggressive. Instead of "I'm sorry, I feel this way," try "I feel this way." Your feelings do not require apology. They are information. They are part of what it means to be a person. Apologizing for them continues the education in self-abandonment. Instead of "I just wanted to," the word "just" is a minimizer, a softener, a way of making your intention seem smaller and less consequential. Try "I wanted to." Remove "just" from your vocabulary when it is being used to shrink rather than to specify. It is a tiny word with an enormous cumulative effect. Every time you use it as a minimizer, you are communicating that what you are about to say is not quite worthy of full-size expression. Instead of "Am I making sense?" in the middle of a confident explanation, try "Is there anything you want me to clarify?" The first version seeks reassurance. The second offers service. The difference communicates something significant about who holds the authority in the exchange. The internal language matters as much as the external. The voice in your head that says "I shouldn't need this," "I shouldn't feel this," "I'm being too much," "I should apologize," that voice has been the loudest authority in your life for years. You will not silence it overnight. You may never silence it completely, but you can begin to question it. You can begin to respond to it the way you would respond to any voice that was being unnecessarily unkind to someone you care about. When the voice says you're being too much, you can ask, too much for whom? Too much by what standard? Says who? When it says you shouldn't need that, you can ask, why not? What is the rule? Who made the rule? When it says you don't deserve this, you can say simply, I disagree, and I am keeping it. The new language of self-respect is not the language of ego or arrogance or self-importance. It is simply the language of a person who takes themselves seriously, who treats their own needs, feelings, and presence with the same basic consideration they would extend to any other human being. That is the standard, not perfection, not constant confidence, just basic consideration, extended to yourself. Chapter 14. What happens when you stop? There is something you need to be prepared for. When you begin to change this pattern, when you start taking up your actual space, expressing your actual needs, holding your actual positions, saying no when no is the honest answer, some things will change around you, and not all of those changes will feel good at first. Some people will be surprised. You have presented yourself in a certain way for a long time. The people who know you have built an image of you, quiet, agreeable, accommodating, easy. And when that image shifts, it can feel jarring to them. Even if the shift is entirely positive, it requires adjustment. Human beings take time to update their models of the people around them. Some people will push back. As I said earlier, the people who benefited from your smallness will not all welcome your expansion. Some of them will name it as a change and not as a compliment. Some of them will test the new boundary, consciously or unconsciously, to see if it holds. That is what you must be prepared for, not anger, not confrontation, just steady, quiet, consistent holding of the new ground. You are not required to explain the change. You are not required to justify it or apologize for it or make it easier for others to accept. The change is yours. It belongs to you. Some relationships will not survive it. This is true, not because you became a bad person, because the relationship was built on a dynamic that required your smallness, and when that dynamic shifts, the relationship has to renegotiate itself. Some relationships will renegotiate successfully, some will not. The ones that cannot survive you being a full person were never quite relationships in the truest sense. They were arrangements that depended on your diminishment. Grieve those losses if they come. They can be genuinely sad, even when they were necessary. Some relationships will deepen in ways you did not expect. This is the other side of the story, and it is the more important one. When you stop performing smallness, when you stop presenting the edited version, when you let people encounter the real, complete, complicated, full-size version of you, some of them will meet you there in a way they never could before, because real connection requires two real people, a performance of smallness and an audience for that performance is not a relationship. It is a dynamic, and dynamics, for all their stability, are not the same as love. When you become genuinely present in your full complexity and your genuine needs and your actual opinions and your real feelings, you become someone that other people can actually know. And some of them will choose to know you, will want to know you, will be relieved, perhaps, that the real version has finally arrived. Those relationships, built on your full presence rather than your careful diminishment, will give you something that no amount of approval, seeking, and people-pleasing and self-erasure ever could. They will give you the experience of being genuinely seen and genuinely chosen, not the provisional acceptance of the agreeable, easy, uncomplicated version of you. The real thing, and you will understand, perhaps for the first time, why it was worth stopping the apology. You will understand what you were actually apologizing for all those years. Not mistakes, not harm, not genuine offenses that deserved acknowledgement. You were apologizing for being a person, for being complex and needy and feeling and present and loud and quiet and unsure and certain and contradictory and whole, for being alive in the particular, unrepeatable, incomparable way that only you are alive, and that specific way of being alive was never, ever something you needed to apologize for. The close, you are already enough. We have covered a great distance together. We started with the recognition, the quiet, uncomfortable recognition that something in this title spoke to you, that the apologizing for existing pattern is real and familiar and costs more than you have been counting. We traced it back to where it was born, the environments and the relationships and the specific messages received early and absorbed completely that taught you that your existence needed to be earned. We named the architecture that holds it in place, the deep, often unconscious beliefs about being too much, about needs as burdens, about your value being conditional, about conflict as existential threat. We decoded what the apologies are actually saying, the message of self-erasure that is carried in every unnecessary sorry, every minimized need, every abandoned position. We counted the cost in relationships, in work, in energy, in the slow erosion of self-trust that happens when you spend a lifetime failing to honor your own existence. We named the faces it wears, the peacekeeper, the over-explainer, the self-deprecator, the invisible one, the chronic yes-sayer, the emotional manager, the grateful for everything. We examined the permission trap, the belief that someone outside was going to finally give you the approval you needed, and the liberation of recognizing that it was never coming. We looked at shame, the difference between guilt for what you did and shame for what you are, and the understanding that shame cannot be resolved through more apology. We talked about reclaiming your voice, the specific, daily, incremental practices through which a new way of being is built, one small act of self-honoring at a time. We talked about the identity underneath the self that was never destroyed, only quieted, that is waiting to be met in its full complexity. And we talked about what becomes possible when you stop, the relationships that deepen, the life that comes into focus, the experience of being genuinely known rather than strategically managed. Now, I want to say one final thing. This work is not linear. It is not a problem you solve once and move on from. You will have days, weeks, maybe where the pattern resurfaces, where the sorry comes out before you had time to catch it, where you fold under pressure when you intended to hold, where the old identity is louder than the new one. That is not failure. That is a human being working on something that was installed before they were old enough to consent to it. It takes time. It takes patience with the process and with yourself, and patience with yourself is, in many ways, the beginning of everything. Because the person who has learned to apologize for existing has often never learned to be patient with themselves, has never learned to extend grace to themselves, has never learned to be, for themselves, the kind of steady, accepting, non-conditional presence that they may have spent a lifetime providing for everyone else. You are allowed to be a work in progress. You are allowed to change slowly. You are allowed to get it wrong sometimes and get it right other times, and not always know the difference in the moment. You are allowed to need support in this process, from a therapist, from trusted people, from resources like this one. And you are allowed, more than allowed, you are invited to stop treating your own growth as something that requires apology. You are already enough, not once you stop apologizing, not once you have fixed the pattern, or healed the shame, or rebuilt the identity. Right now, as you are, with the pattern still active, and the work still in progress, and the old voices still sometimes louder than the new ones. You are already enough. That has always been true. The work is not to become enough. The work is to stop believing the story that says you were not. The story was wrong. It was always wrong, and you do not have to keep telling it. Go forward. Take up your space. Use your voice. Feel your feelings without apology. Ask for what you need without justification. Hold your positions with respect and openness, but hold them. Let the people in your life meet the full-size version of you, and stop apologizing for being here. Because the world is genuinely better with all of you in it. End of audiobook.